Hi everyone, my name's Jack Brooks. So I've always wanted to make a video like this just because I know YouTube is a place that people go to look things up. I always thought of YouTube kind of like Google search but in video form. And weddings is one of the few things I actually have knowledge about that maybe not a lot of people do. And the reason for this knowledge is because I worked for a top catering company in Orange County for over a year and a half. It would have been longer if it wasn't for COVID, but life happens. And I loved the job and I learned a lot from it. I was working weddings, I would say 2 to 3 times a weekend for that entire year and a half. So I've been to a lot of different types of weddings, a lot of different venues. Through all these weddings, I've seen a lot of great mistakes and a lot of great ideas. So I want to share these with you in the hopes that maybe people planning a wedding or like the idea of weddings can really think about these things and maybe help their wedding planning and the day of the wedding go a lot more smoothly and also be a lot more cost efficient. So I hope this video helps, and let's start with number 1. So if you know anyone who might have a dietary restriction in your guest count, try to have an option for them. I've seen it so many times where one of the guests might be gluten-free or vegan, and then they're stuck during cocktail hour watching everyone else get to enjoy the delicious appetizers the bride and groom chose, but they have to wait now until dinner time to get to eat because there's just no options for them. So I really recommend having at least one option be friendly towards all dietary restrictions. That way everyone can feel included during that part of the wedding. And if you think, oh, what if there's not good options? I'm sure if you talk to your caterers, they'll probably have a great option that you'll think is 1, delicious, and 2, will be friendly towards everyone. A really big debate, open bar versus cash bar. So the big question you have to ask yourself while planning a wedding is, where do you think your money is going to be valued for you and for your guests? So something I think is important to ask yourself is, what kind of people are you and what kind of people are your friends and family? Are they really big partiers and drinkers? Or are they people who don't really drink that often and usually just order the soda when you guys go out? I think that is something you should really consider, because why spend so much money on an open bar if your friends aren't big drinkers? If they really want to drink, then they can just pay some cash if they're not big drinkers. But if your friends love to drink and they have to keep paying cash for it, you might as well pay for the open bar, because trust me, your friends are really going to appreciate you for it. Another important thing you want to ask yourself when picking out what drinks are at the bar is if you and your friends and family are more wine and beer drinkers or hard liquor and specialty drinkers. Obviously, you can have all 4 options there. A lot of times I've seen it where bride and grooms will just have wine and beer, but then all the guests keep asking for vodka and whiskey and, what's the other one? Vodka, whiskey, tequila. Those just aren't options. So if you really care about what your guests want, consider what they often get when you're with them and have that at your bar. Also, just a side note, something that I personally think is really cute is when there's a little sign on the bar and it says like his and her drinks. And I think that's a great idea just because usually there's a long line when cocktail hour first starts, and that's something people can read, and who knows, maybe they'll actually say, I'll try the his drink or I'll try the her drink, and it allows people to branch out and try new things. So I think that's really cute. The grand entrance and introducing the bride and groom as a married couple, I think, is such a great moment for the bride and groom, and so it should only be for the bride and groom. I am telling you, nobody cares about all the groomsmen and bridesmaids walking through the tables dancing along before the bride and groom come. Nobody cares. It takes up time, and often a lot of people might feel left out. I've also seen it where there can be 15 bridesmaids and groomsmen, and so you're telling me those guests have to stand up and clap for all of those people to come through? And then I'm just thinking about the girls in those really uncomfortable heels having to stand up while clapping for 15 rounds of people to come through, and then the bride and groom come. But by that point, I know my hands would be so tired and I would just want to sit down. Think about it. It's called the grand entrance. Let the bride and groom be the grand entrance and nobody else, right? And if you're worried about like, oh, well, the bridesmaid and the groomsmen are meant to hype up the crowd, let the MC do that. That's what you paid them to do. And then when the bride and groom come in, everyone will have a lot of energy and they'll think, oh, that was nice, and now we can all go back to sitting. Now let's go into the speeches and what could be avoided. Sharing why the bride and groom are great as people and together, great. Wanting to give your best wishes, advice, a toast, great. Maybe 1 to 2 quick line punch jokes, sure, it's fun. But if you do not tell your toasters a certain time limit, this is a huge risk. And here's the reason for it. I have been to weddings where I have seen a dad give a really beautiful speech for the first 5 to 10 minutes. His speech ended up being 30 minutes. So I highly recommend giving your toasters a time limit. I would say 5 to 6 minutes is probably the sweet spot, because I'm telling you, by that time, the people will get the gist of how amazing the bride and groom are as people and together, and they don't need to hear the same thoughts over and over again. Another thing to discuss about speeches is how many people you're allowing to speak. I've been to a wedding where they had 7 different people speak before dinner, and everyone was starving, and nobody needs to hear 7 speeches. Again, you don't need a lot of toasters to understand who the bride and groom are as people. I personally would recommend the max being 4 people. My thought is 2 people for each side of the party. Maybe the groom could choose his best man and one of his parents, and then the bride can have her maid of honor and one of her parents. Like, I personally know my dad would probably give the speech because he thinks of a lot of funny jokes. Now let's discuss where you place your speeches in the schedule of the wedding. If you put your speeches before dinner service, a lot more people will be able to listen and really take in what the toasters are saying. I just keep picturing like toasters, like dancing around and like talking, giving a show, and I say toasters. The speechers, advice givers, the toasters. I'm just gonna have to say toasters, and that's what it is. Okay, if you put the speeches before dinner service, most often people will be a lot more active in listening because they already had all of cocktail hour to socialize, and now they're just sitting there, they're relaxing, and they can just listen. The only problem I can see with this is if your toasters are giving way too long of speeches, or you have way too many toasters, people are gonna get bored because they're just sitting there having nothing else to do. But if you put it during dinner service, people would be allowed to eat while listening. The only problem with during dinner service is that people might be missing because they're in the bathroom or they're at the bar and they didn't realize speeches were starting, or I've seen a lot of people where they just want to continue having the conversation with the person next to them. Now let's talk about something really fun and exciting. Flowers and other options. So flowers, you guys, are so expensive. I'm telling you guys, not half the time, but over half the time, the flowers get thrown out. So those thousands of dollars that a bride and groom can spend on some table decor is now in the trash after 6 hours of being used. So because I've been to a lot of weddings, I've seen a lot of great alternatives for the table decor, and not only is it unique and exciting, but it's also a lot more cost efficient. So here we go. First off, we have glass vases and greenery. When I first saw this, I thought it was genius and so beautiful, super classy, very simplistic, and so cost efficient. So all it really was these glass vases. They usually had a thicker bottom and a thinner neck, and they kind of had a blue tint to them, and they were all just very Greek, and you could tell they looked almost recycled, like they weren't all the same vases on the table. And then it was just greenery coming out of it. So I want to name a few of the plants that I remember seeing at this wedding. I do want to warn you though that I am horrible at pronunciating words, so I'm going to give it my best effort here. So the first one is eucalyptus, there's philodendron, lamb's ear, leather fir, there's fernal Boston fern, Diethianbachia, I think is how you say it. Not quite sure, but these are just a few options, you guys, on what kind of plants you can use to put in these vases. I just think they're very tropical and pretty. But this is what I mean though. You can buy these vases at an IKEA or a Home Goods or maybe a Michael's. And then you can get the greenery from maybe a Home Depot, and I'm telling you, it's gonna be a lot cheaper than the flowers. Or if you're lucky and your friend just happens to have a lot of tropical plants in their backyard, you can always go to your friend's house and just trim a few off. Another one that I really liked was the bride decided to just buy these tiny ceramic vases, and they were all pastel colors, and then there was just a bunch of them on the table and tiny little flowers that you can pick from the park, or you can buy little sets of that are going to be a lot cheaper than these big bouquets. So some of the flowers that can be used are daisies, tulips, buttercups, and carnations, and then by adding baby breath into a few of them or all of the vases, you're allowed to create a little more volume in what you're producing. The last idea I have, if you really care about having plants, is succulents, because I feel like succulents are always the rage. Plus they're super easy to buy, super easy to choose, and then you can just put them in nice baskets or just have them on the table, yada yada yada. And I just have this gut feeling that I feel like a lot of the guests would actually want to take those home because they're easy to take care of. So now you have the colorful bowls and the colorful candy, and people are able to snack on that while waiting for their dinner to be served or while listening to the speeches. Or if your friends have a really big sweet tooth and they're waiting for the cake to be cut, they can just snack on the candy bowls. Now some of the candies that can be served: Skittles, M&Ms, gummy bears, jelly beans, anything really that has a lot of color variety. I just think this idea is very cost efficient because you can get the candy from the Dollar Tree or 99-cent store, and maybe those bowls can be found there too. And if not, there's always, again, the Home Goods IKEA route. Lastly, an idea I saw that I thought was very classy and regal is having fabric, candles, and fruit. Those are the three things. So for the fabric, you want something very light and fluffy, usually like a silk or a cheesecloth works, and then you just spread it around the table, make it nice and airy. Usually people then put the candles onto the fabric with these glass containers to give it more height. And then fruit. And for fruit, I've seen blackberries, raspberries, pomegranates cut in half, and figs, and it just gives it this very Greek, medieval, classy vibe that I think is really pretty. Now, these are just some of the ways you can save a few grand on the table decor, and there's obviously a lot of other options if you really think outside the box. Now, napkins and linen choices. So, I have seen it all. I mean, I've seen weddings where they decided to go with navy blue and gold, to a wedding where the bride decided she wanted every table to have a different colored napkin, from hot pink to ocean blue to golden yellow, which I honestly really liked because it kind of made me feel like I was at a fiesta. But the biggest problems I see are things like white on white, eggshell on cream, beige on tan. Like, you guys, it is so dull. I understand wanting to be classy, but that doesn't mean you have to get rid of contrast and depth. When you walk into the room, you want to see contrast. You want to see something that's exciting and very refreshing. And by having different colors on the table, it just creates a lot more depth on the table and makes the tables look a lot more dynamic. Let's discuss going the extra mile with your money and if people really care. My opinion is no. Again, put your money where it's going to be valued. This ties back all the way to the open bar, cash bar. For instance, I never understood why, as I set up the tables, why people think to pay extra money for fancier water goblets and fancier flatware and fancier chargers. Because in the long run, it's gonna look nice either way, so why spend the extra money on that? Because if anything, I don't think the fancier water goblet and flatware is gonna make the guests think, wow, the bride and groom are such amazing people for letting me eat and drink from these things. Because personally, if I was a guest, I couldn't help but think, I wonder how much this wedding costs. Also, just a thought, would your guests really know there was a fancier option if you didn't go with the fancier option? Because I'm sure the regular stuff is just as nice for wherever you're having your wedding, and no one would think otherwise, but because you bought the fancier stuff, they now know there was fancier stuff. The one thing I will say I think is a good idea to put extra money into, besides the open bar, cash bar debate, is heaters. If you're having a wedding that's outside and it's winter or fall, you should probably get heaters, because so many times I've done weddings where they didn't pay for heaters, but they did buy the fancier water goblets. And then people kept asking me, oh, are there heaters around? When is this wedding over? When are we going inside? And I would just have to say, I'm so sorry, there's no heaters, it's all outdoors, and this wedding is still going on for another 3 hours. And people would be cold. So might as well put the money into heaters, and that way people feel warm and comfortable while at the wedding, rather than, oh, just shivering away and eating from my fancy flatware. Beef, chicken, fish, and veggie cards. All brides and grooms want their wedding to go smoothly. I would say anyone throwing a party would want it to go smoothly. And to have a wedding go smoothly, I think one of the biggest factors is the dinner service. This includes how fast the food gets to the guests and how smoothly the food gets to the guests. The biggest problem with this is the food symbols you decide to use on those little food cards. I'm talking about the little color pearl to the little color diamond, or the picture of the cow and the picture of the fish. So, with that, please, as the bride and groom, just make sure your symbol is big enough to see, and also the color is contrasting enough. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the room as a server and the lights are low and the candles are flickering. Very beautiful stuff, but I can't tell you the difference between gold and rose gold for shit. By not having contrasting colors or a big enough symbol, the servers are 100% more likely to be bumpy and confused while serving the food, not because they're not trained to serve properly, but they can't see the symbol for what color it is or the shape, and they're gonna be confused on who to serve what to. Wedding cake and dessert stations. Now, this is something really fun to talk about, but it's also something super expensive to talk about. Because a tall traditional wedding cake can be so expensive. I remember I had one of my leads carry a 6-tier cake by himself like this, and I was mind blown. I was like, I didn't realize he was that strong. Turns out it was almost all styrofoam, and I just didn't realize that was an actual thing people do. You buy a tier cake made out of styrofoam and covered with frosting. But one of the levels does have real cake in it, so you're allowed to cut the cake and take your nice pictures, and then it just gets sent to the back, and then you have sheet cake in the back that's served to the guest. Not only is the wedding cake so expensive, but over half the time, just like the flowers, the cake doesn't even get eaten. And it's just because of simple reasons, like people didn't realize there was a cake table with all the cake there, or cake was served to their table while they were dancing on the dance floor, and so much cake gets thrown out. Or the bride and groom is just gonna have a bunch of cake in their freezer. Also, when it comes to desserts, another thing I noticed that is always a big hit is dessert stations. Dessert stations, I think, are a big hit because one, it's unique and it's also interactive for the guests. So there's a couple of options that I've seen personally that I think are really fun. One of them is a churro station. Usually you get to watch the churros be made by the chef, and then there's different options for dipping sauce from chocolate, caramel, raspberry, so it gives people options on what they want for dessert. Or having a s'more station, that's very interactive. People actually get to make the s'mores. Another one I've seen is a giant donut wall with pegs on it, and then people are able to pick out which donut they want, and usually there's some like cheesy donut saying, I can't remember any of them, but it's really cute. Another one I've seen is an ice cream cookie sandwich table, so there's different options for the cookies and different options for the ice cream, and then there'll be a chef behind the table, and while the guests pick out what they want, the chef will make it for them. And these dessert stations are just something a little exciting and fun to do while taking a break from dancing, or taking a break from drinking, or taking a break from socializing, and then they're able to interact with the delicious food they're about to eat. Lastly, for my tips and tricks, a few miscellaneous things. I just wanted to go over a few things that I think can be seen as mistakes for a wedding. The first one is getting drunk at the wedding. If you're the bride and groom and you just spent all that money on a wedding, do you really want to get wasted and wake up the next morning not remembering most of it? I've seen a bride sit on two guys' shoulders, stick her middle fingers out and her tongue to her entire family. I'm talking about parents and grandparents. And the thing is, she probably wouldn't remember it in the morning because she was so wasted. And as a guest too, don't get wasted at someone else's wedding because you might end up being disrespectful and not realize it. Plus, as a guest, you are invited to be part of the memories, so as a guest, don't you want to remember those memories the next morning? This one is not a big deal, but I just know it's facts that 99% of all mother-in-laws wear the same style dress. I'm talking about sleeves that go to here or to here and go all the way down to the ankle, and they're covered in beads and glitter. I can spot a mother-in-law an hour away. They always have the same style of dress. So if you're a mother-in-law watching this and your son or daughter are getting married and you want to be hip and trendy and different than all the other mother-in-laws in the world, wear a dress that's not covered in glitter and beads and have the sleeve length to here, and the length of an ankle, because I am telling you, it is just the common thing that mother-in-laws love to do. Another thing that's not a big deal, but if you want to be original, during the bouquet toss, do not play the song To All the Single Ladies by Beyonce. It is just so overdone. And this is the same when it comes to the last song of the wedding by playing Don't Stop Believing by Journey or Don't Stop Me Now by Queen. Very common songs for the last song, so if you want to switch it up, don't play those. That is it. Those are my 10 wedding tips and tricks to avoid any of the slips while planning the wedding or the actual wedding day. I do hope this helped people get inspiration and possibly maybe understand why things happen at weddings the way they do. I really enjoyed making this video and getting to explain all the wisdom I've learned from watching weddings, and I hope you enjoyed. So thank you so much for watching and have a good one.